So we're going to start with Tom Ewing. Tom is the Senior Director of Labs at System1Group, once known as BrainJuicer. He is a prolific author, has written 2 books. He's a writer of papers and articles. You'll see him on conference platforms. He's a blogger, and above all, he's an amazingly entertaining speaker. And so it's with great pleasure that I'm going to hand over now to Tom.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, I'm Tom Ewing. I'm actually now Head of Communications at System1, and I used to be a Senior Director at BrainJuicer. And that is what I'm going to be talking about today, the transition from BrainJuicer to System1. BrainJuicer was a highly successful company. We grew, we had a great reputation. We topped the most innovative research company in the Grit report for 5 years in a row. And then in April this year, we rebranded as System1. Now, some people in the industry thought this was a bold and exciting decision. Some people thought it was mad. Lucy Davison at Mustard Marketing thought it was a great opportunity for a Viz Fest presentation. So she gave me a phone call and she said, "Do you want to do one?" And I said, yes. So this is a presentation about rebranding from a communications perspective, what it felt like from the inside. I'll be covering what we were trying to achieve, what I personally am proud of about the work that we did, and where we could have done better. And I'll also be sharing 4 bits of advice and 1 big lesson that we've learned. Questions are very welcome. I may not be able to answer all of them publicly. So first of all, nostalgia for the far-off era of early 2017. This is, I hope, the last time that you'll see the BrainJuicer logo on a screen, unless you search for it on Google Image, in which case it will turn up very readily. It is a good logo. It was a very strong distinctive asset for us. It's worth pointing out that actually this logo itself went through quite a few changes. The company was initially founded by John Kieran in 1999 with a logo of a grotesque talking cartoon brain, which apparently we have actually managed to successfully scrub from the internet, because I certainly couldn't find it. Over the years, the brand went through a few changes, but it also accreted a lot of other visual clutter. So we had a firm come in around 2009 and redo our website in a very kind of cartoonish, lively fashion, and it really made it stand out. We then had a second cartoonist come in a few years later to do the cover of one of our annual reports, and we really liked the imagery on that so much that we kept clipping it out and saving bits of it in our presentations. And then we also had the work being done all the time by our own graphics team and graphics department. So we had kind of accumulated a lot of visual ideas, a lot of visual IP, and over the years any brand can acquire this, but they don't all necessarily work together in harmony with one another. And then you've got the difficulty of making sure everyone in 14 different offices around the world is using the same branding in the same way. So a clean, good logo can actually hide a multitude of sins behind the scenes. Of course, we at least tried not to be naive about rebranding. It has its dangers. We were acutely aware that changing even some quite simple visual elements of a brand could lead to severe difficulties. We had the example of Tropicana's catastrophic 2009 relaunch, for instance, which we'd done some testing work on ourselves after the fact. It's very rare for rebrands to be met with general excitement and delight from existing customers, so we certainly weren't doing it for immediate short-term benefit. But we also have more hopeful precedents. For example, there was Snickers, which in the UK at least used to be called Marathon. There are definitely people, and I'm married to one in fact, who have never forgiven Mars for changing Marathon into Snickers. But obviously, Snickers are still sold around the world, the brand has thrived, a globalized identity has certainly helped it in the long run. So ultimately, I guess we want BrainJuicer, as was, to be like Marathon is for most people who remember it at all. A happy memory and a proud part of history for a successful brand. So we have these 2 FMCG examples in mind, Tropicana and Marathon. The difference between them is partly time and partly strategy. One was the result of an ill thought out modernization, which wasn't strictly necessary. The other, Marathon, had an actual strategic aim in mind. And so it's worth asking why a successful medium-sized research firm would want to put itself through a rebrand at all. What were we trying to achieve? The simplest factor is that we wanted to put our money where our philosophy was. I was at TMRE last week in Orlando, and it was encouraging to see that the ideas of System 1 and System 2, popularized of course by Daniel Kahneman, turned up in almost every presentation. They've become part of the standard vocabulary of marketing and of any conversation about human behavior, just like Freud's insights a century ago overturned how people thought about the unconscious. And BrainJuicer had been talking about this stuff for a long time. When I went there for my job interview 6 years ago, the first question I got from John was, had I heard of System 1 and System 2? My answer was no. This was before the Kahneman book had come out. But it was already clear how this was the foundation of everything the company was doing. And yes, we talked about it a lot. At one point, in fact, a particular industry body banned us from using this Homer Simpson brain slide in conference presentations because they said the audiences had all seen it so many times. So part of our thinking is, now this stuff is part of the common language of marketing, we should stake more of a claim on it, emphasize that this is simply who we are. We were also starting to realize that our business model was in need of change. Now, it's worth saying that this thinking evolved alongside the rebrand. We would have changed the company name anyway, but the fact that we were doing that has made it easier in a way to go on to make the, frankly, a bit more painful changes that we need to make under the hood. It meant that we could talk internally about how the industry is changing and the company had to change too, and also made us realize that we'd given ourselves an opportunity and permission to make a fresh start. This presentation isn't really about the System 1 business model, so I'm not going to go into details about what we're doing. But the trends we were thinking about are twofold. A parallel shift away from full-service bespoke research projects to very fast commodified research at one end and high-level strategic consultancy at the other. So we had a double challenge, not only to embed the new identity, but to tie it in with directional changes that we wanted to make. And finally, the third reason was a little more aesthetic. We were very keen on shifting our tone of voice at System 1. As I said, BrainJuicer had over the years collected a lot of baggage, especially visual baggage. For instance, we had a mascot, who you can see here, BrainJuicer, who hosted our blog and website. I was very fond of Brian, especially as I'd written his blog for 4 or 5 years. But we'd reached a point in our development where the kind of cheeky cartoon fun he represented was getting a slightly less enthused reaction at senior client levels. It turns out that the tone of voice that wins you experimental ad hoc projects isn't always the tone of voice that gets you onto testing and tracking rosters. So our challenge was to sound a little bit more business-like, while still being playful, curious, and fun. So, we wanted to showcase our philosophy while shifting our identity to feel like a new company and change our tone of voice. Not the easiest of shopping lists. And honestly, we've so far managed some elements better than others. So the next part of the presentation spotlights what I'm personally proud of in the rebrand and where I'm hoping to do better. The first thing I'm proud of is our book, System 1 Unlocking Profitable Growth, which you can buy on Amazon, and if you're one of our clients or friends, you can almost certainly get free. The impetus here was an agent asking John a couple of years ago if he wanted to write a book. The agent had a Malcolm Gladwell-style general book in mind, the kind of thing you get in airport spinner racks. We wanted to write something that was a bit more of a commercial tool. Over 6 months in 2015, I wrote a 70,000-word manuscript called Commotion, which was, with hindsight, a bit of a freakish mutant crossbreed of the two. The agent, unsurprisingly, didn't have much luck selling it, and we got to a point where we were rebranding anyway. So we decided to redo the book on our own terms. The concept of the book was to take the theories of Kahneman and others, summarize them in an entertaining and lucid way, and then show how to actually apply them to marketing. It would be a summing up of our best work at BrainJuicer and a statement of intent as System 1. From a comms perspective, we really wanted to do something unique, going well beyond the brochures and PDFs most agencies create. In a world of transient content, we wanted something semi-permanent, an actual book which, even though it's self-published, could sit with honour on a shelf next to commercial publications. So it meant seeing it as a long-term play, something that would still be useful and exciting to clients in a year or 2 years. That meant we had to be really tight with the writing and editing. The 70,000-word original quickly became half that length. And we had to use a lot of storytelling, and we had to make sure it was really visual and looked and felt gorgeous. If you're self-publishing, you can do it very quickly and very basically. Just slap it up and get it on Kindle and the Amazon store. But you can also take it as an opportunity to have full visual and creative control over the work and make it look exactly the way you want. Has it worked? Well, I'm prouder of the finished book than of anything else I've done in the research industry. So personally, yes. Of course, it's one thing to write a book, another thing to get people to read it. The responses from people who have read it have been glowing. And I think more than anything else, the very existence of it, the fact that we had the material for a thick, coherent book says, yes, we know about this stuff. We're serious about it. I also like our new visual identity, which I had absolutely nothing to do with. This was the work of Colin Jenkinson at Design Every Day, a design agency we hired when we were launching our sister company, the creative agency, System1 Agency. Most of the identity is based around bold pinks, oranges, and blues. And there's also these abstract color explosions, which create a distinctive background for our presentations and website, and which also work great as animated visual idents. Are these assets as strong as the old BrainJuicer logo and graphics? Not yet. Of course they're not. A distinctive brand asset takes time to bed in, and for people to get used to it. Assets become fluent over time, as your System1 brain gets familiar with them. And strong positive experiences, which obviously we hope to create, help do that quicker. But these visuals have the great advantage of being more consistent than the BrainJuicer library, and they help convey ideas of speed, action, and creativity. At the moment, we haven't quite made that intuitive link, though, between the look and the offer and identity, which brings me onto the parts that we haven't really nailed yet. In my opinion, and I'm not alone in the company thinking this, one of the sticking points with the new identity is that we haven't quite landed our new tone of voice yet. How do we talk about business issues? How do we link that to our philosophy? What's the new balance of playfulness and seriousness? And so on. Obviously, as head of communications, a lot of my job is figuring this stuff out, so it's a particular concern to me. What we have started doing is working with new formats, like snackable videos, and putting a greater range of voices forward. But it's very much a work in progress. My honest opinion is that most research companies are not great at tone of voice. We tend to default to rather nervous imitations of what works for other people. Sometimes we sound like second-hand tech bros. Sometimes we do a bad impression of ad world punchiness. With clients, we can be pedantic and defensive. Our native tone is something like a GCSE science report. A sample frame was created, and so on. There's no research Rory Sutherland, someone you'd read for pleasure just to see what they have to say. But what I don't think I didn't quite appreciate before this year is that when you've got a strong tone of voice, it can really liberate your communications. It creates a kind of confidence that helps you try different things and be a bit more daring. Some of the things we tried at BrainJuicer were, quite frankly, weird. I'm speaking as somebody who dressed as a clown once to present to a baffled advertising conference audience as part of the three-ring behavioural economics circus. But our tone of voice could underwrite all that. A strong tone is partly a cannon to fire you to greatness, partly a safety net to catch you when you fall. So this presentation so far has been unapologetically navel-gazing, except I am now apologising for it, but hopefully it's been candid too. Obviously the point is to express some of the lessons we've learned that might help you. So here's the first one. This one is the most obvious. Rebrands are difficult. I don't think anyone who embarked on our rebrand realised quite how little fun they were going to have. You'll need twice as much time as you imagined you'd need, and you will have twice as much hassle as you thought you'd have, and you still won't have got everything ready or all the paint dry. The more brutal and disciplined you can be about tasks, responsibilities, jobs, etc., the more pedantic you are, the less likely it is you'll end up on our day with stuff left to do. There will be tears, but tears are in this case good, or at least unavoidable. Second lesson. It's about a lot more than just the visuals. The bits of the rebrand people see are only as important as the bits people feel, probably a lot less important. So you have to plan that stuff. As I was saying, tone of voice is a big part of it. Do you want it to feel like the same company with a fresh look, or do you want it to feel like a different company? And how will those feelings change if so? Have those conversations as early as you can, and do side-by-side comparisons of old and new collateral to really feel how the emotional aspects has changed. There's also a lot you can say about internal culture, how the company feels to the people in it. That's out of scope for this presentation, but suffice it to say it's just as big and complicated as the external change, even if you think it won't be. Third lesson, don't change too much at once. On one level, this is basic behavioural science good practice. Humans have, as Gerd Gigerenzer puts it, a gut liking for the familiar. People in business tend to be a bit macho about change and sneer at those who don't like it. But the psychological truth is, change really sucks. Gurus talk about change being good for you in the same way Victorian schoolmasters used to talk about the cane being good for you. Unlike the cane, change is sometimes necessary and a good idea. But the other thing to understand about change is that it's chaotic. Once you've unleashed it, it becomes a chain reaction. It will affect more than you plan for and more than you probably want. It's really crucial to limit the scope of it as much as you can. I saw a lady from Mars talk about rebranding at TMRE last week, and she was saying this too. If you're changing the pack and the product, your problems are squared. If you're changing the pack and the product and the name, your problems are cubed, and so on. Which leads on to System 4. Make sure you have some continuity of assets. Obviously at System 1 we were changing a lot of things at once, which made it more crucial that we kept the stuff under the hood familiar. The way we present results, our star charts, the readings from our emotional measurement tool, those didn't change. We kept a lot of the vocabulary we were using. Fame, feeling and fluency for our branding tools. We think much less than we think, as our in a nutshell statement of philosophy. And that at least lessened the shock and maintained fluency for existing customers. But there's one lesson that we learned that was quite humbling. It was a lesson in empathy, if you like, and a very valuable one. We have spent years getting frustrated at brands assuming they were different. Not so much our customers, though it surfaces there too, but in news reports and interviews. There's a constant theme of, well, we're different. Behavioural science can explain what happens in FMCG, but what about my B2B company? Okay, maybe it explains B2B too, but my widget industry is truly unique, and so on. And when you go to a company and tell them that human psychology has rules and that marketing has rules, you get a lot of partial acceptance. They love the idea, but they don't think it applies to them. And as an outsider, you can see so clearly that it does. But then you go and do something huge internally, like a rebrand, and the boot is on the other foot. Suddenly in meetings, you're the one who's saying, well, that won't happen to us, we're different, and so on. But it's no truer for you than it is for your customers. But it feels true, because emotionally you want it to be true. Your fickle friend, your System 2 post-rationalizing brain, is taking that positive emotion and giving you excellent reasons to believe it. There's another way to put things from a branding perspective. Nobody thinks more about brands than the marketers who manage them. The harder they think about them, the more they lose perspective on how much most other people think about them, which is not at all. That's one reason we have research in the first place. A rebrand is, of necessity, several months of thinking very hard indeed about your brand. It's terribly easy to come out of that believing that everyone else cares as much as you do about it, and that the logic of your rebrand is as obvious to them as it is to you. And it may seem like a funny conclusion to a presentation explaining all about a rebrand, but they really don't care, and it really isn't obvious. Thank you.